Hello lovely people, this is Nicola back in the Stitches and Slapdashery sewing room with a tutorial today. Vlogmas 2023, I bought myself a very small cross-stitch kit. It was a little dog, and on the first day of Vlogmas I made myself a padded bag for carrying the kit with me, because I knew I was going to be going out of town during that December, and I just wanted an excuse to sew another bag. This was the original with the gnomes, and it's nice and squishy because it has Thermolam in it, and it's not quite square. You could make it square if you wanted to, but mine is a little bit wider than it is tall. And at the time I did not make a pocket on the inside, so I added an afterthought pocket of a plastic clear vinyl snap-on pocket, but because it was an afterthought, the snap shows on the outside. This time I have recreated it in 3 different sizes in this really cute pig fabric. I had a meter of this fabric and I easily got the 3 bags out of it with some to spare. I also used a different quilting cotton for the lining because I have a lot of smaller pieces in the stash. The fabric I used for the lining is a different colour in each bag. I also used zipper by the yard, but you could easily use pre-made zippers, like dress zippers, that are the lightweight nylon kind, and just cut the teeth off each end. Not the teeth, the stoppers. So with these bags, I added an internal pocket that is snapped closed on the top, which is quite a big pocket. It almost extends the width and depth of the bag, so there's plenty of room in it. And the end of the zipper extends outwards. What's nice about this bag is that because the zipper is sewn in such a way that it doesn't block or minimize the access here, it's nice and easy to get a hoop in and out. So on this end you've got the zipper stopping just before the end here, and at this end you've got it extending with a tab on the end with a snap, and it snaps down to another one on the seam to make a hanging loop or little handle. So that was the small. This is the medium. Yes, we put them in front of each other and you can tell the difference. And this is the large one. The small one can hold a 4 to 5 inch hoop. This one maybe 6 or 7, and this one maybe 8 to 10. All of the measurements, the finished measurements and the cutting measurements, will be in the description under the video. I haven't put the measurements in the video because there are 3 sets of them, and you can decide either to make all 3 bags or just one. So they are 2 inches bigger each time. So the smallest one finishes at 7 by 8, and then the medium one is 2 inches bigger than that each way, and the largest one is 2 inches bigger than that each way. I think they look really adorable with that piggy fabric. So as I say, I'm thinking of doing a second video to go with this one, where you can decide to add a small pocket on the inside of this that is detachable and removable for whatever reason. You might want to put your needles and your needle keepers in it, maybe. And that will be linked underneath when the video is made. Obviously, it is still in the idea phase. I hope you enjoy the video. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or concerns, and I will read all of your comments and reply to every one of them. Some of the things you might like to have ready before you start sewing is obviously your sewing machine. Thread it up with a thread that matches or coordinates or blends with your outer fabric. The more it blends, the better it looks. If you make any little oopsies later on, you'll need some sort of zipper. I'm using zipper tape by the yard, but there's no reason why you can't just use a dress zipper and just cut the metal stops off. Here are my pullers. I'm going to need to put one of those on my piece of zipper when I've cut it. I'll need some fabric scissors, probably, and some nice little sharp scissors for cutting threads. Something to measure with. It can be a quilting ruler or just a regular ruler. I'm using a walking foot in my machine because we're going to be making a fairly spongy fabric with the thermolam. It's nice to have the even feed, but you probably already also want a zipper foot when you're inserting the zipper, and also for maybe when you're sewing around the bag afterwards, because there's a limited amount of space on the edges. You'll see why later. I've got a snap set here. They aren't cam snaps, but they're the same as cam snaps. They're just the cheap non-brand version. Screwdriver at the ready for when I want to change my foot. And of course I've got my iron set up on the ironing board, and I have a cutting mat on the other side of the room on another desk with my rotary cutter ready to cut my fabrics into the right size. So as I film this, I'm not going to mention sizes because there's going to be 3 different sizes in this tutorial, and I will put the measurements for everything underneath the video. I have already made the smallest one. I'm going to make the medium one with you now, and the intention is to make a large one as well, just to make sure my measurements look good, and then we can go from there. First 2 things you need are 2 rectangles of your outer fabric. If it's a one-way print, this is not, thankfully, but if it's a one-way print, make sure it's the right way up. It should be wider than it is tall. And to go with that, you need 2 pieces of interfacing, a hair smaller, cut it teeny bit smaller, just so that it doesn't overlap and go over to the outside edge, because I don't want to get my iron sticky. So I'm using Thermolam, which is a fusible fleece. Got the gluey side, and it's a bit like a really thin batting that irons on. It's expensive. I don't use too much of it because I know it's expensive. If you want to use an ordinary quilt batting, you could spray base it on with a 505 spray or something similar, or you could quilt this. If you wanted to, you could cut these pieces bigger, do a little bit of quilting, just do a crosshatch pattern or whatever you wanted to, trim it to size, and then you'd be all set to go. So those are going to need ironing. And I have 2 pieces of lining fabric, the same size, using this linen look cotton quilting fabric, exactly the same size. And to go with those, I'm using a medium weight fusible, a woven medium weight fusible. This is better quality, in my opinion, than a regular non-woven fusible. But if you're going for budget, then the non-woven fusible is way cheaper. Talon SF101 is the standard one that a lot of people use. But if you're in Canada, they do their own brand, medium weight woven fusible, and Joann's in the US probably do the same. So I've got 2 pieces like that, which will need ironing. I'm going to iron them from the interfacing side, but I'm going to use a piece of other fabric, cotton fabric, as a pressing cloth. I have a piece cut out for the pocket. This looks huge, but what's going to happen is it's going to be folded in half to make the pocket. And I've got a little tiny scrap of the SF101 to go where the snap is going to go for fastening the pocket closed, just to reinforce it, make it a bit stronger where the pull is going to be, the pulling. And then I have another tiny little piece of fabric, which is 1 3/4 inches by 3. Now this is going to be 1 3/4 inches for the zipper by the yard, but it will be 1.5 inches if you're using a regular lightweight nylon dress zipper. Just measure your zipper tape. Measure your zipper tape if you're not sure, and add 1/2 inch for seam allowances. And then I can also get on with cutting my zipper tape as well. So I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to go fuse my fabrics. Back in a sec. I did all my pressing in one fell swoop. So with this, the outer and the thermolam, I laid the fabric wrong side down, put the thermolam sticky side down, and then put a cotton pressing cloth over it, and then pressed. When you're applying interfacing, you want to lift and press, not drag it across, and preferably not touch the iron to the actual interfacing, because it doesn't always feel good. So that's my 2 exterior pieces ready to go. My 2 lining pieces ready to go with the medium weight woven fusible on there. This is my pocket. What I did is folded it in half with the right sides together and just found the center near the fold and ironed this little scrap of interfacing there, because that's where the snap is going to go later. And for this little zipper tab, I folded the ends in 1/4 inch, and then I folded it back on itself, right sides together. So later we're going to sew down the 2 sides of that and then put the end of our zipper tape inside. The zipper tape's ready to go with the puller. And let's hope we don't forget to put the puller on when we need to. The seam allowances that we're using today are 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. I am going to try and remember to give you the centimeter measurements each time. And I will include them when I put all the measurements underneath the video. I'm using a little scrap to sew onto first, and then onto some of my pieces, just to make it more neat and tidy at the beginning. My stitch length is going to be 2.4 unless I'm top stitching, in which case it will be 3. So the first sewing step will be constructing the pocket. I'm going to sew from the fold down and across, and the same on this side, down and across. Down and across, and leave a gap along here to turn it right side out. The nice thing about a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam is that it's normally the edge of your presser foot. I've sewn down and pivoted there and across, and down that side, pivoted across and there, and I've left a gap of about 2 inches right here. It doesn't have to be very big because it's only a thin amount of fabric, or a small amount of fabric, that's going to be going through that hole. I'm going to trim the corners carefully without cutting my stitching, of course, because that would be silly. So what I'm going to do now is take this to the ironing board I'm going to have it all turned through the right way round. Use my pointy tool to make sure my corners look nice and tidy. And then my seam allowances are tucked inside nicely as well. I'm going to press it flat so it's ready to sew to the lining. Once you've done it all neatly, before you press it, you just put your fingers in there, pull out slightly. The seam allowance falls into place nicely, and then you can press it all flat. Pocket is beautifully ironed. The corners are looking pretty good. So here's my top folded edge, and here is the bottom edge where we have a small opening. I'm going to top stitch across the top edge and extend my stitch length to 3. It's up to you how far from the edge you top stitch. I'm going to try and get it fairly close, because I do like it to be maybe 1/8 of an inch or just a couple of millimeters from the edge. But if it's easier for you to line it up with part of your presser foot, you do that. I've top stitched the top of my pocket near the folded edge. My machine seems to be mucking about with its tension right now. It looks okay on the front though. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect for you to be happy with the finished result. And what I went and did just now is I ironed it in half so I can find the center line. And then I took one of my lining pieces and ironed that in half to find the center line. Remember, it's wider from side to side. So make sure it's the right way up. There's only 1 inch difference in these, so don't get mixed up. So there's no rule about where on here that you need to put your pocket. Obviously it's nice to center it sideways, but as long as it's roughly centered top to bottom, it does not have to be exact. If you have this matched up, this vertical line with the one behind it, which is kind of tricky because mine went a little bit weird. If it bothers you, you can always grab a ruler and be sure that it's the same on both sides. I am a proponent of good enough. Yep, looks good to me. Now, when you're working your way through this bag, there's a number of ways of holding fabric together that you might want to employ. These little wonder clips are great, the small kind. Lots of people use these days. You can use good old-fashioned pins. And when it comes to putting it in the zipper, you can use double-sided tape if you want. I am not doing double-sided tape today. I thought I'd be radical and use pins. So I've just pinned it down the sides there. I'm going to backstitch. I'm going to start over this side. Backstitch here. So down, across and up and backstitch here. Leaving the top open, obviously. And that will attach the pocket to the lining piece. Again, get fairly close to the edge, but not so close that you fall off it. My pocket is sewn on. Now we're going to attach the snap, the first snap. I earmarked these ones. Let's see, male, female. There we go. I earmarked these ones for the outside of the bag because they go with the piggy colour. But I don't have enough to use them on both parts of the bag, so I'm going to have to pick some from here to go in. And hopefully I have enough of those blue ones. So for each set of snaps, you need 2 of the caps, 2 of the smooth caps like that, and 1, yes, they're fiddly, 1 innie and 1 outie. I'm hoping I've got an innie here. Okay, good, I have that. So 2 caps, 1 innie, 1 outie. You need an awl for making a hole, and you need your pliers, the squeaky things. They always squeak like that. Every tutorial I've seen on YouTube, their pliers squeak like that. So we've already got the center of this marked, so it's easy because that's already done. So I'm just going to, just a little bit down from the top, not very far, maybe 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch. It's totally up to you, but you don't want to be too close to the edge. I'm just going to stick my awl through there and all the way through to the other side of the lining. Give it a little bit of in and out because, you know, you want that hole to stay open while you put the snaps in. So on the outside of the pocket, you're going to put the cap through. And then what I like to do is I like to put the outie part where it's going to go and be the one that does the action into the innie. It really doesn't matter. As long as you put 2 different ones on and don't have exactly the same by mistake so that they don't snap together, you'll be fine. So here's my snap ready to go, and then you just have to position it right. The snap cap goes on the bottom, on that smooth part of the pliers, and then you squeeze. Do make sure they're lined up, because believe me, if you get this wrong and this is all squished, that little piece of plastic in there is all squished and crooked, you're going to have to take it out. And believe me, it's hard to take out. I've tried. All right, so for the lining side of things, so you look at your SF101 side, you take your cap and you push it through from the back. And then you put your other side, in this case, my innie, right here. And then, once again, line it up. Make sure it's all looking good from the side, because you don't want to get this wrong. Okay, so now we can just snap that closed. And that is done. That's one of our linings prepared for later. Now for the part that scares most people. And you know what? I'm really out of practice at this. I haven't made a zipper pouch for months, but I did do one earlier today. So I know I can do it. So if you're using a dress zipper, just like a regular nylon coil zipper, which is slightly thinner than this probably and slightly narrower in the tape, just cut the ends off, get rid of those metal stoppers at each end. And if you like, if you're feeling very adventurous, take the puller off as well, but you don't have to. I'm going to take my zipper tape and separate it. Now I have a handy dandy new chalk pen that I got. It just arrived yesterday from Amazon. It's called a Koh-i-Noor. I don't know if you can see that. A Koh-i-Noor Versatile. And it comes with about 7 chalks. The white one is in the pen, and there's 6 different color ones that come with it. My friend had one, tried it, I liked it so much I decided to buy myself one. So what we're going to do is we're going to make marks on the fabric, your outer fabric, for where you're going to position your zipper. You need to make sure that you mirror them. So in other words, you don't want to make the 1-inch marks on the same end of the fabric. You want to have one 1-inch mark over this side on one fabric and over the other side on the other fabric, because when you put them like this, that's how they're going to match up. So I'm going to use my chalk pencil to make a 1-inch mark here, right here, or 2.5 centimeters. And then I'm going to go to the other side of the other fabric and make a similar mark on there. Now here again is where double-sided tape can be incredibly useful. But again, I'm just going to use pins. I can't remember what the method this is called. There's a method where you fold the zipper tape. So you take the end of the zipper tape, you fold it back on itself to the wrong side and make a right angle with the teeth. I can't remember who invented that or initially named it, but a lot of people are using that technique now. So this is what we're going to be doing, because it'll hide this raw end inside the seam, and it means that it's nice and open on the edge. There's not going to be any zipper in the way when you want to put things into the pouch and take them out. So I'm just going to pin this. Some people use double-sided tape. Some people use a basting glue. I do not have basting glue. So you're going to take one side of your zipper and you are going to put it wrong side down across the top of your piece of fabric. Again, make sure this is the wider width here and this is the narrower measurement. You're going to line up your teeth of your zipper with your chalk mark. So it's face down, and the zipper teeth here are going to be lined up with the chalk mark underneath. You're not lining it up with the zipper tape, just the teeth. So I'm going to pin it like mad, using probably about 3 pins to hold it where it is and to keep that fold in place, because it wants to fight you. It wants to get away from you. And you have to be the boss of the zipper. Be the boss of your work. There we go. And then I'm going to make another mark on the other end, where the other end of the zipper is going to land. But instead of 1 inch, I'm going to mark it 1.25 inches. When I did my first pouch earlier today, I used 1 inch and it wasn't enough. And you'll see why later on. It's to make things easier for us. I'm going to pin my zipper across the top of this fabric, matching up the edges. I'm going to put my last pin in right above the chalk mark. These zipper teeth are basically 1 inch from this end, and then this is all matched up, but then you stop pinning 1.25 inches from the end at this end. And you'll see what we're going to do with that later on. And remember, your zipper teeth, the right side of the zipper is facing your fabric. You're looking at the back of the zipper here. So now that we've got this one ready, we're going to do the other one the same way but mirrored. So we've got this fold here on the left-hand end. So on this one, I need to have the fold on the right-hand end. So I'm going to fold. Hang on a minute. Let's get it right, Nicola. Get confusing myself here. So the zipper is going to be sewn on right sides together with this piece. I need to fold this back so that my teeth make a 90-degree angle again. I'm going to put a pin in there. And then I'm going to put the teeth of the zipper again right over that chalk mark. So that it's held there. Then I'm going to pin across perpendicular to the edge. Use as many pins or clips as you need to. There's no shame in it. And then again, I need to make a mark 1.25 inches from this edge. Ouch, stabbed myself again. I'm very good at stabbing myself with pins. All right, the last pin is going to go in right above that chalk mark. So now this piece is ready to go. This one is pinned almost to the end, and this one is pinned with the fold in the zipper. And now we're going to grab our lining pieces, and it doesn't matter which way around you do this, so grab either of them and put the lining right sides together with your outer. You want to be careful to sandwich that zipper so that the teeth lie as flat as possible, which with the zipper by the yard it can be somewhat tricky because it's bulkier than a regular zipper. Just match up all your edges. Make sure not to pin past that 1.25 inches mark. So there it is, pinned. Again, 1.25 inches is left unpinned. This side, put as many pins in as you need to keep that lying as flat as possible, so that when you sew over it, it doesn't fight you too much. I'm going to do the same with the other one. And there's the second one ready to go. So when it comes to sewing, I'm going to make sure my 2.4 stitch length is still there, because I did do some top stitching before. Okay, we're all good. So you're going to sew from the end where the zipper tape is slightly sticking out on the top there. That little bumpy area, you're going to start from that end, and that's important. I'm going to use a little leader so that I don't get any messy bits when I start sewing onto my fabric. And I'm going to change to my zipper foot. While I'm attaching my zipper foot, this is a good opportunity to remind you to make sure you've got a nice sharp needle in your machine. If it's been in there for a long time and you've done a lot of sewing with it, put a nice fresh sharp one in. It'll sew so much nicer. Make sure you're using a good thread too. I'm using a Gutermann all-purpose polyester thread, and it's the best quality, or one of the best quality threads out there. Not worth using cheap and nasty stuff. I like to just sew across that leader tape there and then go onto here. I am still going to back stitch though. I'm going to be really careful to make sure that those teeth are not folded back on themselves when I sew across them. As long as you're using a nylon zipper, it won't break your needle, or shouldn't break your needle, unless of course you accidentally leave a pin in the way. Lining up the zipper foot with the right hand edge of the fabrics. Right, I'm going to double check where my mark is. So I'm double checking that my last pin is matching up with my 1¼ inch mark. I'm going to sew up to the 1¼ inch mark and stop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tail of this zipper and I'm going to pull it over to the left a little bit. Now I want it to be sufficiently out of the way so that when I sew across to the end of my seam, that the zipper is not caught, and there's going to be enough of a gap for when we sew it later so that it's not catching in the seam. So I'm going to pull it over. I've probably pulled it over. Let me just measure how much I pulled it over. I pulled it over about 5/8 of an inch. I am not sure what that is in millimeters. But I'm going to hold it there while I finish sewing across. So what you'll see now is that I sewed all the way across here, but this zipper end is below the level of that seam and is free. And when I flip it open this way, you'll see it sticks out. Now the important thing is that this measurement here is more than your seam allowance, because when you sew the two pieces together to finish constructing this pouch, you're going to be using maybe a 3/8 of an inch seam. So you want to make sure that this is enough that you're not going to catch the end of that zipper here. Another word about fabrics I did not mention earlier, I don't think. If you want to pre-wash your fabrics, that's certainly a good idea. I have not. I don't think these bags are going to get a lot of washing. But if you want to make sure you've pre-shrunk your fabrics, it doesn't hurt to do so. Also, I used steam on these when I fused them, and I'm pretty sure that most fusibles suggest a dry iron. But my iron does not switch off the steam. Once it gets to a certain heat, you get steam. If it has any water at all in it, I can't switch it off like I can with my old iron, so I used steam. So I'm hoping that I'm not going to get too much wrinkling with that thermaland, which can sometimes happen. So that's one side done. And I am going to do the other one in the same way, again working from the bumpy end. So it'll be from this side this time, because the bumpy end is right here. Good idea to go slowly over that folded zipper. And again, we are at the point where we've got our last pin, where our 1¼ inch mark is. So I'm just going to slowly make my way up to that. And then I'm going to pull that pin out, and then I'm going to pull that zipper over to the left. The same amount that I pulled the first one. That's the tricky part. it's easy to make them slightly different, but I think in the finished result it's not too obvious as long as it's close. So I'm pulling that over, putting those layers back together and finishing my seam. And before I do any trimming or anything, I am going to double check that it looks good. Again, we've got this part sticking out of the seam, this part disappearing into the seam. So I'm going to trim those little tiny sticky out bits so they don't end up making a lump in my finished bag. I've turned them both out to the right side and I have given them a quick press. Don't have the iron over your zipper teeth for too long. I've never managed to melt a zipper, but you know, there's a first time for everything. And also keep your iron away from this plastic snap. It looks like I may have accidentally got a little too close with that. It looks like it's slightly damaged. So don't do that. I'm going to leave the zipper foot on to do my top stitching. And I'm going to put the foot across on the other side so that the needle goes down the right side of the zipper foot, because I'm going to have my work this way. If you don't want to move your zipper foot over, just have it that way and work from this side. But yeah, I like to do it this way. I'm going to extend my stitch again to 3. Now when you top stitch, it's important that you don't do it all the way across. You're going to top stitch from here where these teeth end to here where the tape starts to come out of the seam. So a sensible thing to do, if you're me, I might forget, is to make a little mark. So I'm going to do a little mark 1 inch from the end on here and 1 inch from the end on here. And the same with this one. So I'm going to pop this under the foot right where my chalk mark is. Top stitch about, again, 1/8 of an inch. What's that, like 3 mils away from the folded fabric. Go back and forth and then carry on. It is a little lumpy just there, so take your time. So this is what the top stitching will look like. It goes from here to here. And again, that's important. You don't want it to go to the edges of the fabric. I'm just going to do that other one and then I'll come back for the next step. I'm also going to leave my zipper foot in place for this next stage because there is quite a bit of bulk at this end here when you're going to be sewing right past it, and having the zipper foot on does help mitigate that somewhat. Okay, we need our 1 piece of zippered fabric laid out right side up and the other one right side down, matching your exteriors and matching your linings. So this end is fairly straightforward. Now, I don't think it really matters exactly how you sew this. You can push your seam allowances open if you want to. That lumpy end of the zipper is going to do what it darn well likes anyway. With the previous one I made, I just allowed the seam allowances to go towards the lining. Because of the Thermolam being a little bulkier than the SF101, I just let the seam allowances go the way they wanted to go, which was in the other direction from the piece they were on. Now at this point, if you used a regular dress zipper, you've probably still got this end joined together with the puller attached to it. And hopefully you're watching this all the way through before you tackle this project, because I'm going to suggest that if you're using a commercial dress zipper with a puller on it and you've cut your metal ends off, that you do a little bit of a bar tack across there so that you don't accidentally pull your puller all the way off. It can be put on. It's pretty simple to put it back on again, but just in case. Mine, of course, is completely separate because I'm using the zipper by the yard. But what I want to do now is I want to join my zipper tape together with the puller on it. So I'm going to line them up the correct way, and I'm going to go use my zipper jig. There is a way to do this, and it's not that hard. Famous last words. It is possible to put this on by hand just by popping one side of the zipper in and then doing the other side and then pulling. Let's see if I can do it today, shall we? Normally I would trim a little bit off that side, but I don't want to do that because I'm actually going to probably be using my zipper jig. So we put that side in, and then we put this side in till it clicks, and then we grab both and then we pull. Yeah. If your zipper pull did come off of your commercial zipper, or if you don't have a special tool for getting the puller on here, I suggest trimming a few teeth off of the right hand side of the zipper. Then you put the zipper pull onto your left teeth first, and then you position your right teeth into the opening on the other side, and then it seems to go together better. I just managed to do this without using the tool that I have, that my son very thoughtfully 3D printed for me. I'm going to make sure this is lined up nicely. It's not particularly. Over here, my zipper end is not really matching particularly well. So I'm going to take this off and I'm going to take it over to my little doohickey and do it over there. The zipper jig is just a little gadget that holds your zipper pull in place while you thread the zipper tape in. So I'm happy with how my edges are lining up on this side and on this side. So we're going to leave it like that. Well, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to open it a little way first. Now, when you get to the point where you're sewing all the way around, A, you're going to leave yourself a turning gap so that you can turn it right side out. B, most important, if you are using a commercial dress zipper, make sure this zipper is at least halfway open. These guys, by the yard, you can easily open them from the back if you forget, but the other ones aren't so easy. All right, so now we're going to bring the two right sides of the linings together and the two right sides of the outers together and pin it all around. I'm going to pin there first. Much as I love Wonder Clips, I have to say pins hold things better sometimes. Now on this side, you want to tuck your zipper extension into the right side, or no, not the right side, the exterior of the bag. So you're just going to bend it over and just tuck it into there so that it's between the layers of the exterior. And here is where you're going to find that it's probably going to be better to use a zipper tape, a zipper foot, to sew the seam, because there's quite a bit of bulk here. And if you have your walking foot on there, it probably won't get past it. This is also why we didn't top stitch all the way to the end. So we've got the seam allowances free falling where you want them to go, and not insisting on going somewhere else. So once I've done the 2 zipper ends, I can then match up all the other edges, which should be fairly straightforward. She said, hopefully. On the finished bag, you are going to be able to see on the one end of the zipper whether you did a good job of matching up your seams. Not that anyone's going to be looking that closely, I suspect. It's not matching up perfectly, but you know, one of the things about making bags that are lined like this, all of the messy stuff is hidden inside. It's so great. So if your seam allowances are wonky, you can usually hide all that in between the layers and no one will ever know. It's always going to be a little tricky sewing over that bulky area right there when you've got that much going on in there. Now, if you're like me and a little forgetful at times, or getting a little carried away with your sewing machine, you might want to just put yourself a little reminder over here that you don't want to sew there. I'm not sure which side I'm going to sew it from yet, so I put a little X in the very middle of this edge in the lining, because I'm going to leave about a 4-inch gap approximately where I'm not going to sew, because I need to be able to turn it through afterwards. All right, so this is all pinned, and what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start sewing from one of these positions here. Oh, I need to move my zipper foot over so that my needle's in the right position again. And I need to change my stitch length back to 2.4. Now that I've remembered to do both of those things, I'm going to position my foot over that seam there and start sewing the outer section first, but I'm not going to carry on all the way around. I ended up starting here, going down and across to this corner. Now I'm going to go back to the other end of the zipper and start sewing here, and then go down to the corner on the exterior. It's just to try and get those seams to match up as closely as possible, really. Now, if anything's going to try and pull your seam off kilter, it's going to be right there where the zipper tape is doubled back on itself and tucked inside. Make sure you're not sewing over that. All right, so now we're going to go back to one of the points in the middle again, at one end of the zipper, doesn't matter which one, and put it back under the foot. This is very, very bulky, right here, just here where this zipper tape folded back on itself. It's annoying. You're just going to have to wrestle it a little bit. So make sure that your stitching goes over the previous stitching for a little way and start sewing again. Definitely wants to pull it away from your foot. If you look at it afterwards and you notice that it looks really wonky, you can always sew it again. So I've sewn down and across a little ways, and now I'm going to go back to this part at the other end of the zipper. It's the part where we folded the zipper ends over. It's not as bulky necessarily, but it's still a little lumpy. And I'm going to start a little way back from where the junction is there and go over it. I can see it went a little off when I sewed it before. As you can see, okay, full disclosure here. The first time I sewed from there that way, I was far too close to the edge. When I went back and I sewed from there that way, I straightened it out a bit and it looks a lot better. But this side doesn't look that great. I don't know if you can see that, but the stitching is definitely messy. So let me just see if I need to fix that. I do need to fix that because on this side, the fabric got pulled so much that it's barely being held by the stitching. So I'm going to go over that again from this side so that I can see where I'm going. Because we don't want our seams to come undone. Well, I've redone it and we will see what it looks like when I turn it through. I'm going to just trim the corners on the outer and the inner. We're not boxing the bottoms on this bag, so that's nice and simple. I'm going to go turn it the right side out. Now this is where you find out whether you remember to leave your zipper open or not. So let's just push our corners out on our exterior. Don't have to be really rough with it because they don't have to be sharp. They won't be sharp because they're quite padded. Undo that zipper all the way. Oh, not all the way. Haha, I haven't got a tab on it yet. I don't want to undo that all the way. Nearly did it. Now, before I close up the hole in this lining, I am going to just take a look here at the intersection. You can take a minute to admire how well you managed to get your seam going right there, your seam matched up. I'm just going to look at the back of it and open out my seam allowances. So I've opened out my seam allowances and I'm going to fold that down now and put a clip in there. We're not sewing across that, but I just want to hold it so that it's as flat as possible while I do the next step. And then on this side as well, I'm going to just reach through the hole in the lining and again flatten out my seam allowances, which seems to be taking far longer than it should. If you do what I did and make a few passes at it, it may be a little tricky to do. All right, so next thing to do is sew a bit of top stitch across to seal up this hole. Again, fingers in the hole, pull sideways, and everything usually falls into place quite nicely. Not always, but usually. So we're just going to do a line of stitching along there, and because I've not changed my zipper foot yet, it's going to be the zipper foot. Okay. I sewed as close as I could to the edge of that fabric to sew up that hole there. In fact, I got a bit too close to the edge at one point. But we won't talk about that anymore. We are nearly there. Nearly there. Looking pretty. So now what we need to do is add a tab to the end of the zipper. At this point, you can certainly decide that your zipper is longer than you want it to be and trim it down. But I'm going to leave it as is. What's going to happen is that this zipper is going to have a zipper tab on it that's going to snap to the side of the bag. Again, that's optional. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. So if you would rather just have it come out a couple of inches and then put the tab on, it just gives you that nice open wide thing going on with the bag. When you're putting things in and taking them out, there's no limiting zipper on each end. So I am going to leave it like this, and then I'm going to put the tab on and then put the snap on. So with the tab, which we prepared earlier, remember what we did with this one? We did the little folding. We're just going to, well, first we're going to change back to our walking foot. So from this folded edge where you've got your two little seam allowances ironed down, you're going to sew a quarter of an inch seam or a 3mm seam just down there. Hang on, quarter of an inch, 6mm seam. I'm going to use one of my little red pieces of fabric, one of my little leader fabrics, so that it doesn't chew up the thread. I'm glad this is the last bit of sewing because it looks like I'm going to be running out of thread soon. And you know, if you're not confident with your seam allowance, here's a little hint. You're going to want this to go inside this when it's done. So what you can do is grab your chalk pencil again, if you know where you put it. And you can actually make a mark. So if you hold your zipper over the top of that and put a mark on the sides, then you'll know exactly where to sew. So let's see, I'll put that over that like that, and then make a little mark here. And here, it's a very scant quarter of an inch seam actually, because you need to allow for that to be inserted in afterwards. Okay, let's go. All right, I did my two little seams. I'm going to trim the corners right there, and I'm going to flip it around so that we can see the right side of the fabric. I'm going to push out the corners carefully as I can and go and give it a little blast with the iron so that it's nice and neat. And totally luckily, I managed to get a cute little piggy face right on that front. Here we go, all ready to insert the end of the zipper. So I'm going to take the end of my zipper. I think I might just give it a little bit of a haircut because it's looking a little bit frayed on the end. I'm going to slide that zipper into the little casing, but you're not going to push it all the way. And you can probably guess why, because we're going to be putting a snap. Oh, we're going to put a snap right through Piggy's little face. Oh, that's a shame. I'm just pushing it in far enough so that it's enclosed, maybe about, I don't know, I'm not sure what that is, maybe a little over 1/4 of an inch. I'm pushing it in, but there's still going to be some empty space inside this tab because we're going to be putting a snap on there. And obviously if we push the zipper teeth all the way in, then the snap wouldn't go in, would it? We wouldn't want that. All right, I'm not going to pin it. I think it'll be okay. Haha! I'm so optimistic today. And I'm going to sew a square. So I'm going to sew across here and then around as neatly as possible. Now, when I did the one before, it got a little hung up on one of the corners. So I'm going to take it slowly and hope for the best. Again, this is why it's a good idea to make sure your thread coordinates nicely so that it's less likely to look messy. You might want to just take it slowly over the nylon teeth as well. In fact, you don't even have to, come to think of it, you do not have to sew all the way around it. If you're worried about how neat your stitching is or not neat your stitching is, you could just go across that one area just to hold the zipper tape in, but not bother going around the rest of it. Because yeah, this is exactly where I hung up on the last one. And it does not want to go. With something this small, it's hard to control it. So I went across, around, and then across again, and then did a little back stitch. It's liable to be a little bit messy. If your name is Nicola, it might be a little bit messy. We are so close to being done. So we've done all the sewing. Now we've got another little tricky bit. If you have the same pliers as I do, you'll notice there's a very small throat here. If you have something that's huge, like a fancy desktop thing that weighs 5 pounds, good for you, but I do not. I only have this little thing. And so that limits me to how far I can reach. So what you want to do is you want to see how far your pliers will fit. Like put them between your bits of zipper there. And there is a little bit of finagling that can be done to pull the fabric into the throat and get down there. I managed to get, on the bags I've made before, 3 inches down the seam. And that was the absolute maximum I think I could have reached. So in order to do that, I like to pin my layers together here, just temporarily, because you want your side seams matched up perfectly. So I'm going to put a pin in the outer seam here, right there, and I'm going to see if it comes out in the right spot. Amazingly, it did. Let's get rid of these little threads that are sticking out here. Well, it was exceedingly close anyway. There we are. So I put a pin into the side seam, and it came out in the side seam inside. Try and make sure that your lining is sitting nicely so it's not bunching up. All right, so I'm going to just pin that quickly, and then I'm going to do the same further down. I'm going to put it into the side seam and hope it comes out in the side seam of the lining. It did not, so we just have to wiggle that around a bit. So again, I put a pin into the seam, and then I want it to come out in the seam on the back. Again, I'm going to have to do a little bit of finagling. Can you see that? Coming out the seam. So I'm going to just pin that as well, just to keep things held together, so that when I put a snap in the side seam, hopefully all the layers will be in the right place. Okay, but before I do the seam one, I'm going to do the one on here. So we'll get these ready again. We have an innie, we have an outie, and 2 caps. So I'm going to find my awl, and I am going to, very sadly, spike this cute little piggy to put my snap in. Just eyeball the center of it. It doesn't have to be dead center in both directions or anything, as long as it's away from the bulk of that zipper end. Okay, so on this zipper tab, we are going to go cap down from top. You can't see. We're going to go cap through from the top. We're going to put our outie onto the back, and we are going to smush it carefully. Just smushed. And then I'm going to measure 3 inches down the side seam, make a little mark. Three inches down the side seam. Right there. So now I'm going to put the awl through and hope that that's all going to work out. So here's my mark, 3 inches from the bottom, the top of the bag. I'm going to poke my awl through right into the seam and make sure, yep, it's coming out as close to the seam of the lining as possible. Make that hole. So try and hold your layers together as tightly as possible, because after you take that all out, the layers are going to want to shift. And then get your cap, insert it from the back. This is the tricky part, because you cannot see. If you went right into the seam, it's hard to see where they all went in. All right, I have a very tiny little nubbin of cap there showing. Now normally when you put these pieces onto the end of the cap, they hold themselves there quite nicely, but because there's so much thickness here, this just wants to dive right off again. So I'm going to get rid of those pins so that I don't stab myself. I'm going to go between the pieces of zipper tape there. I think what I might have to do is, I made the mistake of letting go. It doesn't matter if you let go of the little outie, but try not to let go of the cap. Okay, here we go. You can certainly make your life a lot easier by making the snap go in maybe 2 inches from the top of the bag instead of 3. Okay. All right, we're nearly there. I'm going to just pop that on now and then slide it under there and hope for the best. I think I did it. Cross fingers. There we go. So there's the snap on the inside seam. There's the snap on the outside seam. Phew! Did it without losing anything onto the floor or messing anything up there. So now you can do up your beautiful bag and snap the end of the zipper onto that side seam, and it makes the little hanging or carrying handle. And there you go. What did you think of that? I hope you found it helpful. You don't need to use this for cross-stitch kits or projects. Of course, you could use it for anything. It's not boxed on the bottom, so it's a fairly flat bag. If you feel confident about that, you could easily make it boxy on the bottom and use it for something else. It could hold any sort of project, really. A small crochet or knitting project, or a much larger knitting or crochet project, or whatever you want to put in it. The sky's the limit. Thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate you being here and watching all the way to the end. And I'll see you again soon for something different.